Good evening and welcome, everyone. My name is Dirk. Thank you for joining our live, interactive, virtual public meeting. ESA Solar is hosting this virtual public meeting due to COVID-19 public health concerns and to accommodate individuals who may not be comfortable attending an in-person meeting at this time. Tonight allows us the opportunity to speak directly with you, wherever you are, about the Carroll Road Solar Project. Now, as I mentioned, this is an interactive forum, and we would love to hear from you. We'll be taking as many questions from participants live on this event. If you have a question, you can press *3 on your phone keypad at any time, and you'll be placed in line to speak with a member of our staff. They'll take down your name and a brief overview of your question. Then the next time you hear your name, you will be live on the call and able to ask your question directly. Now, if you're streaming the event through the website, you can simply type your name and question below the streaming player. We'll do our best to answer as many questions this evening as possible. We do receive a lot of questions during our live events, so if we are not able to address your question tonight, please visit the project page on Facebook at Carroll Road Solar. Visit their website at carrollroadsolar.com or send the development team an email at info@carrollroadsolar.com. Again, if you have any questions throughout the event, please press *3 on your telephone keypad or type your question below the streaming player. I'll now turn this call over to our host for opening remarks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. My name is J.Vandenbroeck. If you are online, there are some slides that accompany this presentation, and they're pretty helpful. Lots of visuals, lots of photos. But if you weren't able to join online, hey, that's no problem. We'll talk you through this. I'm really excited about tonight. We're going to give you a little bit about who we are, why are we here in Lenawee County, a little Solar 101, and then also we are going to talk a little bit about some of the key questions that we've heard from the community around what does this project do for my community, how can this help us, topics around farmland preservation, being an agriculturally predominant county. This is a topic that is constantly brought up, so we want to talk a little bit about that and what are some of the ways that we see collaboration between solar and farmland preservation, and then also property value impacts. Talk a little bit about that with some subject matter experts. So stay on the line. We've got a bunch of people who will be joining us from different companies, independent organizations that can share their insights. And then we'll have Q&A as mentioned. So we can go to the next slide. And we can actually skip 2 over to meet some of our team. All right, so this is some of the core team. You may have met a lot of us around town. We've been working in Deerfield and Raga for over a year now. And some of the most common faces you've probably seen are the 3 at the top, which is Lindsay Latre, our CEO, Matt Drennan, who's our project manager, and then myself, J.Vandenbroeck. But there's a bunch of us on the team. Our leadership team has over 45 years combined experience in the solar industry. Some of us have spent our entire career working in this sector, and so it's something that we are very passionate about. We've been working in the residential business, the commercial sector, and the utility scale sector, which is what we're talking about here today. So our team's been working together for a little over a decade now and have done projects throughout North Carolina, projects in Michigan. We have one in Shiawassee County that's starting construction soon, and several other projects that we would love to share with you. So we can go ahead to the next slide. All right, and then we can go one more past. So the project that we're talking about tonight is Carroll Road Solar. This is a 200 megawatt project. A lot of people don't really relate to the term megawatt. We don't use that in our daily livelihood or our daily conversations. But for solar energy generation, it's about equivalent to powering 500 or 50,000 homes over the course of the year. So that's the size of the project in terms of power generation. In terms of land, we are leasing a little over 2,100 acres, but behind the fence, based on our preliminary site plan and some of the preliminary engineering we've done, it's about 1,700 acres, right? Lenawee County, for reference, has 385 1,000 acres of farmland in the county. So while 1,700 acres may sound big, when you take a look at Lenawee County at large, it's a rather small percentage of land. There are 11 families leasing their land to this project, with about 80% of the land currently being farmed by the families themselves. And then 9 of the 11 families live either within the township or the township next door, and only a couple families live a 20-minute drive away. So we're pretty close to home for a lot of these folks. Next slide, please. Great. So I wanted to show on this slide some photos, and if you're not able to tune in to the slides, that's okay. I'll try to talk you through this. But a lot of folks aren't familiar with how do you build these solar projects? What are the methods of construction, right? So what you typically do is you drive steel piles into the ground. These steel piles are your structural supports that basically connect your panels and your tracking system to the earth. So you just drive it in a certain depth. You don't need to pour a bunch of concrete or put a bunch of gravel. In most cases, you don't even need to grade or do any sort of heavy earthwork. It's a pretty benign way of driving your attachment points. And so what you happen to see with that is you see that the permeability of the land remains very high. So you're still able to see a significant amount of water infiltration, not a lot of stormwater runoff, and as long as you're managing the land holistically and planting native grasses or pollinator species, you can really support the local biological system. You can increase biodiversity and really improve and have some really strong ecological outcomes with your project. And we have a rancher on the call who manages solar projects around the country who can talk a little bit about that. Also, what we do is the solar panels, they turn sunlight into electricity, right? So we're not taking sunlight and reflecting it on a focal point and then creating a high temperature. That's something that you've seen out in the desert historically. It's very uncommon for modern solar development. This is a standard generating electricity from the light. And the good thing about that is that the light has a spectrum, right? So for us, what we see as visible light, although it may not be the sunniest of days, there's still a good amount of sunlight to capture and turn into electricity. And so solar does work in the Midwest. It works in Canada, Germany, northern latitudes. You see the deployment of solar. From the solar panels, you basically collect the electricity and transmit it. You usually send it to inverters, and then from inverters to transformers. And that's because the electricity grid is running in alternating current, and the solar panels could produce direct current. So you need to transform or invert that electricity and ultimately make that electricity compatible with the electricity grid. These inverters are relatively benign. Some people have concerns about the noise of them. I've seen people running around with like, here's a video of an inverter, it's super loud, but they're standing right next to it. We don't put inverters next to homes or next to people. Those are an essential part of the site. And like any inverter or transformer you would see in town, say you're walking by one, you'll hear that hum from that transformer. And as you keep walking, that sound will dissipate with distance. So it's a basic mathematical question of putting your inverters away from people so that there is enough distance so that the sound dissipates and drops to the decibel level that's near ambient. They also only make noise during the day when the sun's shining, so you won't hear that at night because we're not generating electricity. And then the last thing we do work on non-PA 116 land and PA 116 land. Actually, MDAR, the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, they have basically encouraged solar energy, saying that they think this is a good use on PA 116 land. We don't get the tax incentives that farmers did on that, and so it's a really interesting narrative, but we can continue. So on to the next slide, we have why Deerfield and why particularly Riga in these areas here. So if you go to the next slide, Riga is actually sitting on quite a gold mine, if you will. The Morocco substation, which is that state-of-the-art substation off County Line Road, was built in late 2015, early 2016 to provide replacement electricity to Lenawee and Monroe County once the coal-fired power plant came offline. So that substation is meant to serve this region, and it has a significant amount of capacity to collect electricity and transmit it to the homes and businesses in the area. So that was one of the first reasons we chose this area. Anytime you do solar development at this scale, you need to be able to collect that electricity and connect it to the grid cost effectively. And so that usually guides your process. So you start to look into where's the transmission lines around the country or within a state, and where are the substations, where are load centers where electricity is being consumed, because you want to build a project that's low cost, clean energy that will actually get on the grid, because you don't have to, the utilities don't have to do solar. It's a matter of economics, and the cost of electricity has come down tremendously, which I'll touch later. On the next slide, a lot of people say, I thought Michigan had no sun. You're relatively correct in the sense that Michigan has a lower amount of sunlight than other parts of the U.S., but for Michigan's purposes, the southern belt of the state is where you see the highest amount of sunlight. And so I have a graph from National Renewable Energy Lab, or an image that shows the amount of sunlight collected. On average, Lenawee County, you can create 10 to 15% more electricity in that area than you can, say, up in the UP. So it's a very strong solar resource for the state. And again, Michiganders, you want to be generating your electricity in state. You don't want to be buying it and sending your dollars out of state. So it's a good thing to have generation in state. And then another reason, going to the next slide, is landowners. If landowners aren't interested in doing solar, we don't have the ability to claim eminent domain and take over their land. These are landowners who are exhibiting their private property rights and exhibiting what they feel is the best thing to do with their land. And so we lease the land from the landowners. We are essentially their new long-term tenants. Without their support and partnership, this would not be a thing. We wouldn't be talking about this. So those three things really are what driven us to this area: the substation, high solar resource in the southeast part of the state, and then willing landowners. And we can go to the next slide. So I've been working in solar for a decade now. I got my start as a solar installer in 2010. That's how I paid for college. I was installing solar panels on homes and businesses and did it all throughout school while I got my engineering degree. And in 2010, the cost of electricity from utility scale solar projects like this was nearly 5 times higher. The cost for these projects to build them in 2019, 2020 has come down about 89%. And so solar went from being this heavily subsidized form of power generation in California and Nevada and these more liberal markets where people wanted to subsidize it heavily to go green or whatever, to the point where we can build cost effectively solar projects cheaper than natural gas or coal, and definitely cheaper than nuclear, unless one of those has subsidies, right? So a lot has happened in a very short amount of time. So if you're not in the industry or you're not following it, it'd be easy to think, oh, solar is a heavily subsidized thing that's really expensive, it drives electricity rates up, but it couldn't be further from the truth, because one, costs has come down a lot, and two, your electricity rates are defined by multiple things. It's the cost to generate electricity, it's the cost to transmit the electricity, it's the cost to distribute the electricity, it's the cost to do billing. So it's not black and white like that. So a lot of people will say, oh, California, they went all renewables, their electricity costs are super high. Don't be like that here in Michigan. It's a straw man argument. So we can go to the next slide. I just wanted to reference this because a lot of us kind of forget where a lot of our electricity comes from. This is DTE's Monroe power plant. It's likely to be the last power plant from coal in Michigan, probably going to be decommissioned as soon as 2030. Right? You're talking about a radically different form of electricity generation. We're going from digging up coal, which you see on the next slide, which is Peabody's coal mine in North Dakota, which does immense damage to the earth, immense damage from an extraction, toxicity levels, from moving this coal around the country to burning it, to storing the ash, et cetera, to a form of clean energy. So it's a really, really radically different thing. If you're in the host, please put yourself on mute. I'm getting some backfeed. Please just check your phones. Thank you. So then going to the next slide, you'll see another image of a coal mine. This is Art Coal's Black Thunder coal mine in North Dakota. I think we get out of touch because we don't see. We just turn on the light switch and our electricity comes on, right? So we don't see where does our energy come from? What is the devastation that has to undergo so you can get electricity to your house? and turn on that light or turn on the stove or whatever. So I think it's important to kind of take a step back from the weeds of solar and think about where our electricity comes from, and do we want to be responsible citizens about where we get our electricity from. Going to the next slide. Another important thing to note is the nice thing about solar is when you build a project, you know exactly how much electricity this project can generate over the life of it, right? You know exactly how much you're going to invest from day one. You've got a pretty good idea of what it costs to maintain it, to kind of keep the vegetation controlled, to troubleshoot issues as they come up. And you know, because we have 40 years of data around the amount of sunlight that hits the location, we know exactly what that cost is going to be for 25 years. So usually what people will do is they'll sign a power purchase agreement where they will sign an agreement with the utility. I will provide electricity at this cost for the next 20 or 30 years, whatever that term is. It's really tough to do that with coal and natural gas. And so the slide that I have up is the past 20 years of natural gas pricing. And this is according to the U.S. Energy Information Agency. And so you've seen the cost fluctuations, and there's a lot of exposure on that for consumers where costs can go up and down. Right now, we've been benefiting on some amazing innovation in hydraulic fracturing, and so the cost of electricity generation from natural gas has been really low, but it's volatile, and it's supply and demand, and it's in global marketplace, kind of like commodity crops. There's supply and demand at the global and national level that can influence price, and so you don't have a lot of control locally. So solar is a great way to take local control. Next slide, I think sometimes we forget that solar is not like a cottage industry. And again, this is from the U.S. Energy Information Agency. This is not a solar industry report. This is our federal government in 2020. When they did their annual energy outlook, they expect that renewable energy will make up 38% of the electricity grid in the U.S. by 2050. That's 38% by 2050, coming from 19% today. And of that, they expect that over 45% of that new renewable energy that comes online will be solar, right? It is the fastest growing electricity resource throughout the projection period between now and 2050. So the future of electricity generation is largely going to be renewable energy and natural gas. Natural gas is projected to go from 37% today to 36% in 2050. So not a lot of movement. You can go to the next slide. And with that growing market share of solar and renewable energy, what we're seeing is it's the third fastest growing occupation in the United States of America. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics and their 2019 through 2029 Occupational Outlook Handbook, that's a mouthful. Basically, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics that tracks job growth in occupations, they take a look every year at what does the next decade look like for jobs, right? And so what we're seeing is that over the next decade, they're expecting jobs to grow by 51% for solar photovoltaic installers, so solar panel installers. So it is the third fastest growing occupation. And you compare this to what is the average in the U.S. is 4% growth. So you're talking about a fast growing industry, very innovative industry, a lot of jobs for people who are going through high school or college or want to go the technical route, right? This is a major growth opportunity for the county. And if you go to the next slide, this is another graph. This is Bloomberg New Energy Finance. They took a look at the amount of jobs currently in the U.S. power generation sector. There's over 875,000 Americans working in power generation, and 335,000, so just over 1/3 of them, are in the solar industry. So it's a fast-growing industry. That's also because you can do solar. It's not something that needs to be centrally generated. So there's multiple methodologies. There's generation on the utility scale, generation on the distributed scale, and generation at the residential scale. So I wanted to just touch on a little bit of kind of some aspects of solar, right? People get concerned about glare. People put solar next to airports. Indianapolis Airport, if you fly into there, there's a big solar facility right outside of it. If you go to Denver Airport, there's a solar facility. Tallahassee, Florida, that's not an issue. There's noise, but you just address it by locating your inverter strategically, right? So I want to talk a little bit about the Solar 101, and I hope that was helpful. And then the next thing I wanted to talk about was kind of big picture. Why are we focusing on this community? in location. A lot of people think, oh, you just chose this location because they didn't have zoning in Deerfield. That's not the case. It's because there's a transmission substation on site that's state-of-the-art, good solar resource, willing landowners who have private property rights. And then the next aspect was some macroeconomic future of what does the future of power generation look like in the U.S. So at this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand this over to Matt Drennan from our team. Like I said, there are some big topics that folks have questions around, like what are the benefits to my community? What are ways that we can, preserve farmland, and is solar actually an appropriate way of doing that? And then also, what are the impacts to property values? These are big questions, and so we brought in subject matter experts to support that. And so Matt Drennan from our team will be facilitating this dialogue in the next sections. Again, if you haven't dialed in on your computer, I recommend you to go on so you can see the slides. And at this time, I'm going to kick it off to Matt, our project manager on this project.
Thanks, Justin. Hi, everybody. This is Matt Drennan with ESA Solar, and we'll continue on with some subject matter experts. First and foremost, we're going to have what are the benefits of the community. We have Fletcher Mangum, who did the economic and fiscal impact study of the Carroll Road Solar Farm for Deerfield, Raga, and Lenawee County at large. And so I'm going to pass it on to him. Fletcher, if you can do a quick introduction, and I'll follow these slides for you. On to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we were founded in 2003. We're located in Henrico County in Virginia, just outside of the city of Richmond. We specialize primarily in renewable energy, assessing economic and fiscal impact of renewable energy, along with data centers and a host of other economic development alternatives. Next slide. I'm going to go over just a few of the high points from our economic and fiscal impact assessment. The total capitalized investment for this project is anticipated to be $242.5 million. When we take that and we look at the construction impact in Lenawee County and run that through an economic simulation model that we use called M-Plan, which is very specialized, it looks at the economic structure within the county, it looks at the expenditures that are specific to this industry, and gives us numbers that are very specific both to the industry and both to the locality. So it's one of the most commonly used economic simulation models in the country, and the reason is that it's very accurate and very specialized. When we look at the one-time pulse of economic activity from the construction, what we find is that the project would generate within Lenawee County 203 job years. And we use job years for construction projects because that does not mean there'll be 203 workers on site for the entire period of the construction. What it means is over the course of the construction, it'll generate 203 job years, FT equivalents. There will be approximately $8.8 million in associated labor income from that employment, and it will generate local tax revenue during the construction, one-time local tax revenue of approximately $268,704. When we use the information that we receive from ESA on the operating expenditures and we pump that through the M-Plan model, what we know is that in terms of direct employment for the facility, it'll employ approximately 4 people, and their overall expenditures within the locality, both for salaries for those 4 individuals, along with expenditures on vegetative control, maintenance and repair, and other operational expenditures, will be approximately $1.6 million. The other thing that we looked at was the fiscal impact, which is very important, and most of this conversation is going to be about that. And one of the things to keep in mind when we talk about fiscal impact is that for every locality within the United States, their primary source of revenue is property tax revenue. And for every locality within the United States, their primary expenditures are on schools. And one of the advantages of very capital-intensive projects, such as solar or data centers, is that it's relatively small employment, but a lot of capital equipment that's taxed. And from the locality's fiscal perspective, what that means is that not that much in school expenditures associated with the project, but a lot in terms of tax revenue from property tax. So from a cost-benefit perspective, it's very little cost and a lot of benefit. Over its anticipated 35-year operational life, the Carroll Road Solar Project is anticipated or expected to generate approximately $35.1 million in local tax revenue. Next slide. This slide shows a breakdown of that tax revenue relative to what the property currently generates in terms of property tax. The property currently generates would generate over a 35-year period approximately $2.8 million in property tax. With the solar facility, that property would be rezoned. When it was rezoned, it would be subject to a different tax rate that would include 18 mills for local schools. As a result, that property or that tax on the land itself goes from $2.8 million to $4.6 million. In addition, the capital equipment that is associated with the solar facility would be taxed, and that over that 35-year period generates approximately $30.5 million in tax revenue for the locality. The next slide looks at that $35.5 million and breaks that down on where those revenues go. $8.9 million over the 35-year period would go to Lenawee County, $6.1 million to Deerfield Township, $1.9 million to Riga Township, $1.2 million to the Blissville School District, $1.4 million to Britton Deerfield School District, $10.3 million to the Intermediate School District, general funding for schools for the county, and $632,925 to the Deerfield Library. Now, those are kind of abstract numbers. So the next slide tries to put those in a more concrete form by comparing that to local budgets or the locality's current local budgets. And what we found in our analysis was that the Deerfield Township revenue from taxation on the capital investment associated with the project would be approximately generate $465,373 in revenue in the project's first year of operation. And we compare that to the township's FY19, fiscal year 19, total government funds revenue or total revenue. What it shows is that the projected first-year revenue from the project consists of about $242,803 in road, highway, and bridge fund revenues. That's more than the current budget in the county for that use. Projected first-year revenue also consists of approximately $141,635 in fire rescue and fund, which is more than the revenue that's currently generated for that purpose of the FY19 budget. We estimate the additional Riga Township revenue from taxation of capital investments associated with the Carroll Road Solar Project would be approximately $147,991 in the project's first year of operation, which is equivalent to about 22% of the township's total FY20 projected government funds revenue. Of that amount, projected first-year revenue also consists of approximately, or within that $147,000, of approximately $53,956 in road, highway, and bridge fund reserves, which is equivalent to about 31% of the fund's projected FY20 revenue. Projected first-year revenue also consists of approximately $67,087 in fire and rescue fund revenues, which is equal to about 29% of the current or projected funding for FY20. So these are fairly significant additions to local funding, to say the least. This project will contribute to the sinking fund for Blissville Community Schools and Britton Deerfield Schools. These funds are used for capital expenditures such as technology improvements and the repair and construction of school buildings. For Blissville Community Schools, the Carroll Road Solar Project would add approximately $94,310 in year one of the project, which is more than 18% of the FY19 annual sinking fund revenue. Carroll Road Solar would provide a total of about $1.2 million over the 35-year life of the project to Blissville Community Schools in 2020 dollars, assuming the sinking fund levy will be extended. Britton Deerfield Schools' fund balance had endured low balances until the approval of a sinking fund millage, which raised approximately $355,000 in fiscal year 19. The Carroll Road Solar Project would add approximately $107,913 to that fund in year one of the project, which is about 30% of the FY19 fund revenues. Carroll Road Solar would provide a total of approximately $1.4 million over the 35-year life of the project to Britton Deerfield Schools in 2020 dollars, assuming the sinking fund levy is extended. The Lenawee Intermediate School District oversees Blissfield Community Schools and Britton Deerfield Schools, as well as the 9 other local school districts. Carroll County Road Solar Project would provide approximately $790,276 in tax revenue to the Lenawee Intermediate School District in year 1 of the project, and a total of approximately $10.3 million over the life of the project. And Matt, I think that's all I have.
So if it's okay with you, Matt, I'd like to jump in very quickly. This is Dirk, the moderator. As a reminder to everyone that has joined us on the call, if you have a question you would like to ask, you just need to press *3 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. Again, if you have a question you'd like to ask, all you need to do is press *3 on your telephone keypad to get into the question queue. We will be answering questions as soon as we're finished with the presentation. And the dial-in toll-free is 877-229-8493. Again, the dial-in toll-free number is 877-229-8493. When prompted for an access code, you can touch 120042#. So again, 120042# to join us on the phone. So now, Matt, I'll send it back to you, sir.
Enabled, and so everybody should be able to view it and hear it now. I'd like to bring in Tim Robinson now from Lenawee now to speak a little bit more about, what Fletcher was just speaking about, the economic impacts and how it relates to the Lenawee economy. So, Tim, if you're there, if you could speak a little bit, that'd be great.
Okay, yeah. Again, this is Tim Robinson with Lenawee Now. We're the Economic Development Agency for Lenawee County, a private public nonprofit. Basically, Fletcher gave a great presentation, most of mine, what I was going to sort of reinforce. But as an economic developer, when we're looking at economic development deals, our mantra is 2 things: jobs and tax base, more of both. And this deal has that, especially the investment at $242 million of private investment. This is the largest economic development in the county, at least in the last 10 years, maybe 15. This is even bigger than the new hospital. So the result of that is the property tax, all the property tax benefits that Fletcher talked about. Next is jobs. You have the 150 or so, I think, construction jobs for however long it takes to build this thing, half a year. I think Fletcher put that in 203 job years, which is good, high-paying construction jobs. The 4 jobs to run the facility afterwards might not get people excited, but I think it's a positive for this project. Because Riga and Deerfield, out there, that's the rural area of our very rural county. So if this was a normal project at that investment level, it would be hundreds of jobs. That would be hundreds of people on the road to get to the job and back and forth. We're not going to have that in this case. We're going to have 4. You won't even notice the traffic, post-construction. I think that's a big positive. Environmentally, Justin touched on that. We're not digging coal out of the ground for this. We're not putting smoke and carbon in the air for this, and we still get enough energy for 50,000 homes. Again, I think that's a positive. And then lastly, is this a good business deal? They're leasing land. They're trying to lease land from farmers. And as far as I'm concerned, the best business people in the world are farmers. And the fact that they're willing to do this with their land speaks volumes to me. Most businesses worry about next quarter. Farmers worry about the next generation. And if folks that are thinking that long term think this is a good deal for them, who am I to argue? So like I say, from an economic development standpoint, I think this is a very good project. Now it's up to the folks of Riga and Deerfield to decide for themselves. I think that's it for me, sirs.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tim. I really appreciate that. The next person I wanted to bring in here is, something about solar and utility scale solar specifically. People might not be familiar with it, right? They don't see it if it's not near them. And, there's not really a project near Lenawee County, at least within 100 miles, right? So, the biggest project that's in Michigan right now, and that's currently operating, there's bigger projects that are being constructed right now, is in Lapeer, the county, Lapeer County. And so we have Commissioner Brendan Miller, who I was hoping maybe he could touch a little bit on what are the impacts to the community, what have you seen before and after, and how has the community received the project?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me on. And this is a project. The project is called the DeMille Project and the Turtle Project. The two combined make about 50 megawatts of electricity. So it's a bit smaller than what's proposed, but I will say I drive by it every single day. I interact with it nearly on a daily basis. So I can give a pretty good representation of what it's like to live near and to be a county commissioner with a solar project. So with that being said, one of the most important things about the solar project is the additional tax revenue that it brought to the county. Now, just going through this whole COVID situation has definitely brought that to a new forefront, because one thing that COVID has affected is county finances. It's put us in a different sort of hole, especially with counties. We face different financial dangers than, say, even a city or a school district, and townships are very similar to that. When everything happened, we actually got a little bit less revenue from everything else, and the state didn't quite fund us and the townships the same way that they did, say, the schools and obviously the state government. So having a project like this is a really stabilizing effect on property taxes, which is really important. And to put that into perspective, the average amount that the county of Lenawee, and by the way, Lenawee is just a tad bit, just a couple thousand residents bigger than Lapeer, so we're actually very similar in that regard too. But as far as potential impacts, so Lapeer County is actually having to put an animal control millage on the ballot because our animal control and animal shelter just isn't able to keep up with the additional cost of maintaining animals and dealing with everything else. So we actually have to put an additional millage on this year, try and get additional voters. That additional millage will raise roughly around $200,000. This project would be projected to bring in about $250,000 every year additional into the county coffers. So if we had that, say, in Lapeer County, we wouldn't have to bring those sort of proposals to the voters because we'd have the additional revenue. Another thing to keep into perspective is that money is roughly about the amount of 3 full-time police officers for a county, at least for Lapeer County size, and probably the same for Lenawee County as well. So that's additional revenue that can be used for things like public safety and public health and other things, even like Parks and Rec. And the last thing I wanted to touch on is when our proposed solar farm was initially going to be brought into our county and our city, there were some people who actually brought up similar issues, quote unquote, that they might have with it. Things like glare, things like potential land losses, property value collapsing, and noise issues. It's actually one of the projects is really close to a residential suburb area. But I can tell you, I know people who live there and they can't hear it, even though they live right next to it. So the noise is an issue. It's right next to a freeway, and there has never once been an accident in that area from any sort of glare. So just to kind of clear up that sort of misconception and let you know, a lot of the opposition points that I've kind of heard in Lenawee County is similar to the opposition points heard in Lapeer when it was initially proposed, but none of those that were brought up at that time in Lapeer ever came to fruition. And so I just want to kind of throw that out there as well, let you know that some of the things you might hear about glare, about noise, and about property values definitely were not the case in Lapeer, and we've had it now for several years. So I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. That was great. Really appreciate that. And we're going to touch on appraising property values here in a second. But first, I want to take it over to land management, right? So one thing about the solar industry is, it does take out a significant amount of land. And by 2030, the United States should have somewhere near 1 million acres of land that's been that will have solar panels on top of it. And so one thing that we have to do is become exceptional stewards of this land. And so we're bringing in Trent Hendricks here, who's doing just that. And so, Trent, if you could come in and speak a little bit about yourself, what you've seen from solar projects thus far, and what are the best practices to make sure that this land is taken care of properly for the entire life of the project and later on.
Thank you. I'm Trent Hendricks from Cabrillo Ranches. We're based in Missouri, and we operate in quite a few states, predominantly in the greater Midwest area, both for our traditional ranching enterprise as well as a really growing aspect of our business in stewarding land under renewable energy. And it's pretty exciting for us. We actually believe it's one of the greatest things to happen in agriculture. Even though this is an energy conversation, it is clearly the nexus of agriculture, environmental stewardship, and renewable energy. And we could not be more excited about it. Agriculture is capital intensive, thin margins. It's difficult if you're not born into agriculture to get involved in agriculture at a production ag scale. And being paid to manage land is that you don't have to pay for is an excellent way of building a business. It's allowing young people and new people to come into agriculture. I have a large family, and by adding this aspect to our business has enabled two of my children already to full-time enter the ag business without us having to actually buy more land. It's because we are converting our agricultural skill sets into a new service industry. And we're able to build the asset base, our animals, without the liability of having to pay for land in the process. We also are at the forefront of an emerging area you may have heard of, often referred to as regenerative agriculture. We are trained and have been licensed in several different forms of regenerative agriculture that enable us to not only manage the land more holistically with a pretty intensive land use plan, but it also gives us the skill sets and the science and the metrics to validate that we are, in fact, actually accomplishing our goals. So we can quickly find out that, we'll lay out a plan on how we're going to graze or manage the land. And again, we do use livestock, predominantly sheep, as our primary tool. It's certainly not our exclusive tool, but our primary tool, trying to convert that grass to lamb and continue to keep the land in agriculture producing human food. But we also do it in a way that's going to build soil organic matter and get the soil covered, prevent erosion, improve the water infiltration and water holding capabilities. We work with a lot of native species where that makes sense. When it comes to vegetation, native prairies, obviously the first and highest regard of this plant is to convert sunlight to electricity. But above and beyond that, we want to use the land as holistically as possible. So we can improve the environmental aspects, species biodiversity, including pollinators and all manner of small wildlife. I mean, it's very common to see coyotes and deer and turkey and so forth on our sites. It's not exclusive to livestock, simply by creating that biodiversity, that habitat for them. And oftentimes our sites are either surrounded by timber or cropland, and we find that a lot of animals tend to live within these solar sites, particularly the larger utility scale ones like this one. So it's a really exciting opportunity. We're pleased to be able to bring our point of view to this call. And really, again, I got to make a side note here. I've heard several times on this call about noise, and that sort of cracks me up a little bit because we're on these sites many weeks, every day, all day. And I mean, the air conditioner at my house is louder than an inverter on most days. And we're on these sites and sometimes around the clock, depending on the activities. If it's super hot, we'll do a gather during the nighttime. And We've been there for sunrises and sunsets and in all conditions, and just really it's a very nice environment. Yes, there's a lot of glass and so forth, but it's surprisingly serene, and our animals actually are very comfortable on these sites. These inverter pads, we actually have to put small fencing around it because the sheep find them to be very comfortable places to lay around and ruminate. And so, again, it's a very, very natural setting, even though it's covered in technology. Unless one has had a chance to actually spend time on it, it's almost impossible to understand just how comfortable these environments are. Our sheep are thriving on them. We have good performance. They're typically well protected from predation because there's the security fence around the perimeter of the property. And we take this is a commercial scale operation. This is not a backyard weekend kind of gig. We run thousands and thousands of sheep across thousands of acres across a dozen states. And this is a very commercially viable, large-scale food production model. We typically work with local people in our areas where we have these solar projects, and we'll have a local family or enterprise that wants to work with us, and making sure that we provide the mentorship and the skill sets and systems to allow for the outcomes we desire, as well as for the safety and productivity of the sheep, and ensuring that the vegetation is kept in compliance with the needs of the solar plant. So it's very much commercial scale agriculture, which Michigan is very comfortable with and used to, and it's very much at still the human level. You can see in the picture we're gathering sheep. We have large portable corrals, and we set them up to do our sorting, our livestock handling, loading out, etc. It's not just kick them out and hope for the best. We do subdivision fencing, and we ensure that the sheep are managed very carefully. The sheep welfare is very high priority for us, and we have a pretty robust veterinarian supported system that we use. This photo here, you can see this is just a regular gather. That's only part of a flock. There's probably about 1,000 sheep in that picture, 2 pot loads worth. Pot is what we call a livestock trailer for hauling livestock. And, we'll move these sheep around as need be. That site there, those sheep were there, 2 loads were there for about 10 days and cleaned that site off very nicely. And we'll move them to another site on a larger project like Carroll Road. We may have a resident flock that's there for the entire green season, or it may be that we bring a large number of animals in and have them there for a few weeks, a couple of times a year. Again, it all depends on what we determine with all the various stakeholders involved when we get to that point. But it keeps the land in agriculture. There's not an offensive smell associated with it, and by having livestock on these sites, not only are we keeping them in food production, but we're also it's part of the biodiversity aspect. By allowing animals to graze instead of using herbicide or mechanical mowers as our principal tools, this allows for ground nesting birds, allows for pollinators. We typically work to ensure that we're allowing native species to, at least in parts of the site where it's appropriate, to grow to maturity and drop seeds. So we definitely work with the environmental interests as well. And long term, there's the ecometric side of things, which is becoming very popular. It's understanding that the outtake participants of the electric are very correctly concerned with what is the impact of generating that electric. And when we can show that we're building organic matter in the soil and we're improving the biodiversity, we can demonstrate with metrics, with numbers, with satellite data that the land is regenerating and that it is healing, and it's going to be as good or better as it was prior to the solar being installed on the properties. And that's where we're not just vegetation management, we're not just sheep plus solar. It's a very holistic approach that ensures that the needs of all the interested parties have been addressed, and factored into the land management plan.
Excellent. Trent, thank you so much for that. We really appreciate it. So for the next topic, we really want to bring in an expert on property values that has researched and has the qualifications on property value analysis around solar farms, right? That's been a big concern, as it should be, right? If people have that question, it needs to be answered appropriately. And so we're going to bring in Andrew Lyons from Cohn-Resnick. They've done studies throughout the U.S. on these projects. And so I'll let Andrew jump in and give a little introduction and about what his work has shown.
Thank you very much. This is Andrew Lyons. I'm a principal at Cohn-Resnick. And for the last 3.5 years, we've been focused on performing impact studies on solar sites. If you want to go to the next slide. I'm still really excited about the livestock on solar. So I'll try to stay in my lane here, but that's pretty exciting. I started in real estate at a Sam Zell company approximately 20 years ago. Eventually got into appraising real estate and eventually received a certified general real estate appraiser license, and a little bit more recently received MAI designation, which means I'm a full member of the Appraisal Institute. I'm a partner at Cohn-Resnick, which is an advisory, assurance, and tax company. We're about 8th on the list of accounting firms and have a number of offices nationwide, where I lead a group of real estate evaluation professionals who perform appraisals on all types of property, including agricultural property, single-family residences, and large commercial and complex properties. One of the things that we specialize in is performing impact studies. And for the last 15 years, I've performed impact studies on a wide variety of property types that residents are concerned about, including landfills and new big box retail, transmission lines, truck terminals, and even wind turbines. But as I said before, for the last 3 years, we've been very focused on solar, as this has been a growing development trend, especially here in the Midwest. I operate out of our Chicago office, and we do a lot of work here in the Midwest, and we've been able to examine a number of solar farms that are existing and active, understanding that a lot of the region has fairly similar demographics, topography, and land uses. Next slide. Just a little background on exactly what we do for our impact studies. Our methodology comes right from the textbook. There's a great manual written by Dr. Randy Bell, who's also an MAI like myself. He wrote a book about real estate damages and applied economics and detrimental conditions. And so we take our methodology directly from that particular book. And what Randy Bell talks about is about looking at paired sales analysis, where we compare test areas that are potentially impacted with unimpacted properties called control areas. So what we'll do is we'll identify an existing solar farm, and we'll look at the GIS and all the public records for all the properties that are immediately adjacent to that particular solar farm. And we'll see if any of those properties have transferred between a willing buyer and a willing seller, so a market transaction, since that particular solar farm had been erected. And then what we'll do is we'll compare that test sale or a number of test sales in case there are multiple transactions, and we'll compare that with a control group. So properties that are in the same community but located much further away from the solar farm itself. And so we're testing for proximity here. And what we'll see is when we look at median prices per square foot of either group, if the control group tends to have prices that are much greater than the test subjects, then we can say, well, there's something that's influencing the test subjects, and maybe it's the solar farm. And And if the test group and the control group are very similar, then we would say that there is no influence as caused by being proximate to the solar farm itself. And so this comes right from the textbook. If a legitimate detrimental condition exists, there will likely be a measurable and consistent difference between the two sets of market data. So it's something that we would need to see not just once, but in multiple cases. And so what we've done is that we've examined solar farms, not just here in the Midwest, but also coast to coast. I've looked at solar farms in Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Missouri, California, Hawaii, New York, North Carolina, Virginia, Florida. Next slide. And what we found when we've looked at all of these solar farms, and some of them are community solar size, so they might only be about 5 megawatts. Others are utility scale, so some are 100 megawatts or a little bit larger. And what we find that there is no quantifiable and consistent detrimental impact measured between the test areas and the control areas with regard to proximity to the solar farm itself. And this includes our studies of ranges of sale prices, differences in the unit sale prices, the time on the market, overall marketability. We've also studied rates of appreciation for homes that have sold multiple times while existing next to a solar farm. And one of the other things is that they don't curtail new development. And that can be a concern for many landowners who might think that someday, because of the trend of development, you might be able to build a subdivision nearby. And so what we've seen is that in suburban and in rural areas, that the solar farm itself, which has been erected, has not impacted new development from occurring. In fact, in Indiana, we have a case where there was a smaller farm that was acquired, and someone built a large estate home that was 150 feet from the house to the panel. Next slide. I do have a couple of specific examples that I wanted to show everyone, just so that you understand what we're looking at and kind of what we've done. And I believe the first one is, as someone had mentioned earlier, the project up in Lapeer. So certainly that's within our state of Michigan, and we want to make sure that we're looking at something that's as close to home as possible first. So, this project was announced in 2016. The project was completed in May 2017. And when we identified test sales that had occurred around both sides of the solar arrays and compared those with other homes located away from it, so control homes, we saw that there was a positive difference favoring the test subjects, so favoring the homes that were directly adjacent to the solar site, with a difference of 0.24 to 3.31%. And so that's just indicating it's a really nominal difference, but it did favor the test sales slightly. But there's clearly no negative impact based on the methodology and the tests employed for this particular solar farm. Next slide, please. But we didn't want to leave it just like this. We did want to look at what's the largest existing solar farm in the Midwest. Well, that goes with a site in Minnesota. It's in Chisago County. It's called a North Star solar farm. And this had a number of transactions and a little bit of the history, which I'll get into as soon as the slide goes forward. But this is 100 megawatts over 1,000 acres. It is about 45 minutes or so north of the Twin Cities. And what we found, I think it went one too far on the slides there. Thank you so much. This was announced in 2014. It was fully developed in 2016. And so we were able to identify 5 test subjects that had sold since the completion in 2016 that were arm's length market transactions. Everyone knew that the solar field was there and there weren't any related parties. And when we compared those transactions to control sales, we saw a nominal positive difference favoring the homes next to the solar farm at 1.35%. But we weren't the only ones who did a study. The local tax assessor also produced their own study of assessed values. And when that assessor analyzed all the transactions in the county, compared them with the ones that were near the solar farm, the assessor did not find that there was any difference in sale prices either. So we had another individual familiar with the market area perform their own impact study and came to very consistent results. What's interesting about this particular farm is that there were 4 homes that were located right in the center. And so you could see that, they're all surrounded by solar in 4 directions. According to our conversations with the original developer, they had purchased all of these homes prior to development for above market prices. And that was based on appraisals they had done. Well, after they developed everything, they put all the homes back on the market at the same time. And they all subsequently sold within 60 to 90 days and all at prices that were higher than the original appraisals. In fact, one of the homes was reacquired by one of the original owners. And so when we look at all the data that we have for this particular solar farm, we don't believe that the solar farm itself deterred transactions, nor did it impact or affect sale prices negatively in the surrounding area. Next slide. Again, we've looked at over 24 different solar farms and conducted the same kind of impact studies looking at market transactions. And based upon all of our examination, research, and analyses of these existing solar farm uses in the surrounding areas, we've concluded that there is no consistent negative impact that's occurred to adjacent property that could be attributed to the proximity of being next to the adjacent solar farm. And this conclusion has also been confirmed by a number of interviews with numerous county assessors who've also investigated this use's potential impact and found none, as well as conversations that we've had with brokers who sell these homes and residents that we've met when we've gone to physically inspect some of these solar facilities and their surrounding property values. And with that, I'll hand it back over to the guys at ESA, and thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to answering any questions that you might have.
Yeah, terrific. Really appreciate that, Andrew. And so right now what we're going to do is bring it into a Q&A, and I think we're going to have our moderator read a few questions that we've received online and through the calls that we've received. Dirk, can you go ahead with the first question?
Certainly will, Matt. And so just as a reminder, if you have a question you would like to ask and you're on the phone with us, please press *3 on your telephone keypad to ask a question. That by pressing *3, you'll be taken to the question queue. And if you are listening along online, you can submit your name and question below the streaming player. And so we've got a question here. It is, do you think solar can help meet farmland preservation goals? And I think that's a good question for Trent. Trent, can you take a moment and answer us, please?
Sure. I think that's a question that needs to be unpacked a little bit to make sure that I understand. But in general, I would say a qualified yes, in that it achieves the primary goals of most of the conservation programs I'm familiar with. Understanding that most farmland conservation does allow for farm development, whether it's hog barns or silos or dairies or houses for family members. There is a development aspect typically allowed, while limited, allowed for servicing the needs of the farm operation. And I would say that while it may be atypical and may require a little time to wrap our minds around it, covering it in glass in a fashion, it would be very much in service of the needs of the farm, particularly when it does not limit the functionality of the farm and the ability to produce crops from that land. It's actually a stacking enterprise. It's actually adding additional value to the land without taking away any productivity. And also, too, there are sometimes contentious viewpoints on the best way to manage farmland, and some concerns in certain parts of the country about runoff or erosion or things that may impact water quality, etc. And while I'm not here to address them specifically, I will say that our goal as stewards of land under solar is to get them covered in grass, turn them into grasslands, and manage them to the best of our ability to prevent erosion and increase the biodiversity while also maintaining agricultural production. So in general, I would say that yes, this is in line with the needs and goals of conservation of farmland. It just requires perhaps a slight adjustment in our view of what is farmland and what is farming. And if we can get comfortable with that, I think that this makes a ton of sense.
Thank you very much for that answer, Trent. Now we're going to bring Marcy Van Black on the line with us. Marcy, thank you for your patience. Thank you for joining us on the call, and you're live. Go ahead with your question, please.
Okay, well, my first question was what the benefits are to the people that live in the village of Deerfield versus the township where the project is planned.
Sure. Marcy, hey, this is Matt Drennan with ESA Solar. So, the big benefit for the township is, through their economic benefits and additional services they could provide. The village would not receive revenue through the project directly, but they certainly would receive benefits indirectly through additional services such as new roads, better, fire services. There's lots of indirect benefits because the village is actually, it's surrounded by the township. So don't think that anybody that lives in the village versus the township is left out. It's certainly it's put in within the community. All the revenue that would go to Deerfield Township and Ragged Township would certainly be used and surrounded. That is surrounded by the village. So I think you have another question here. Did you have something else?
Well, following up on that question, the slide that you went over that kind of showed the benefits for the school and the fire department, I'm the administrator of the community page. So I wondered if that would be available afterwards, or should I be telling people on the community page that you'll be having another call? Because I think you had really good information, and I just want to make sure I'm able to pass that along.
Yes, ma'am. I'm very sorry that we didn't mention this before. We will be sharing this virtual town hall to the public. It should be within, I'd say, a week that we'll get this up, and we'll have it for everybody to share to view. If you weren't able to see all the slides, if you're just dialing in, we'll give the presentation in the slideshow. We'll most likely post it on carrollroadsolar.com and our Carroll Road Solar Facebook page. And if you'd like, we most likely would be able to put it on the Community of Deerfield Facebook page as well.
Okay, so are you ready for question 2?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm interested in what it means for the actual local fire department and BD and Blissfield schools. So can you break that down a little bit, or kind of go over what you did at the very beginning so that I have some notes on this?
Absolutely. Hey, Fletcher Mangum, who did the economic impact report, let's bring you in and see if you could speak a little bit to Marcy's question. That'd be terrific.
What we did was, or the breakdown that you see in terms of that slide, the revenue that would be collected from the capital equipment itself, and where that would play out in terms of Lenawee County, Deerfield Township, Rygo Township. Those are millage rates that would be assessed against the overall capital investment of the project. What we did in the examples that we provided were show how that would break down, or how that could break down, and compare that to current budgets for those particular factors or those particular services. And I think, I'm not sure if this answers your question, but those are overall tax revenues for those subdivisions, political subdivisions, that are shown in the executive summary. And if you have specific questions in terms of what that would mean for the local services from those political subdivisions, we address that somewhat in the full report, which I think that will be available. And we can individually, if you'd like to contact us, give you additional information if you would like.
Okay, nope, that was kind of the slide I was looking at and wanting to, make sure that we'd have access to at some point. And I know at one point it was talked about maybe the possibility of being able to put solar panels on the fire department or on the school. Has that been discussed anymore, or is that kind of null and void until the project can go further? Like, where would that stand?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is Matt again. Well, one thing that we like to do in any project that we, or any community that we build a project is, we're not just trying to, build a project, pay the lease, pay the landowners through the lease, and that be it, right? We like to have additional impact in the community, right? Whether it's through our scholarships that we've been doing or through additional, donations to certain entities. We're very open to that. So it's still kind of to be determined on exactly what we want to do in that aspect, but it's certainly something that we will do once the project, we got shovels in the ground. That's when we would be trying to make those commitments.
Okay. Now, are you ready for my third question?
Sure.
Okay, so what if ESA Solar asks for a tax abatement? What happens to all these figures that you guys have outlined in the economic impact report?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. So first off, your question is if ESA were to ask for a tax abatement. So let's make it very clear that there is no tax abatement option that the community would have to, accept, right? So there's no tax abatement option in Michigan. It's not like Indiana where if you build a solar facility there, the county has to address a tax abatement and put it up to a vote. So you said ask for a tax abatement. If we ask for a tax abatement, I don't even know if we'd be allowed to do that, but we have no, it's not in the cards right now, right? There's no real options for any type of tax abatement unless it went through the legislator. And right now I'm unaware of anything that would allow that to happen. And what happens to the figures on the impact report, if anything like that changes? Well, I mean, obviously these figures are based on today's millage rates and taxes that we're expected to pay, right? How things change, okay. We don't know how it's going to change. We don't know how farmland might be taxed. We don't know how, my payroll is going to be taxed, right? So it's kind of up in the air, and we're just using today's understanding to create these studies and to create this investment.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
All right, moving on. We've got another caller joining us now. We have Melissa on the line with us. Melissa, welcome to the call. Go ahead with your question, please.
Hi. I had a question regarding the economic impact study the information Mr. Mangum had given. And the graph, he had shown that in under the present use, that the land involved would have a total of $2,814,203 in property taxes that would be paid over the next 35 years. But then he said with the solar project, it would increase to $4,645,963 because it would have to be rezoned. You're going to ask to rezone the property, and what would you be rezoning it to?
I may have misled you somewhat in that, I mean, what would happen is that the property currently has an agricultural property exemption tax rate. Once it went to solar use, it would switch to a non-principal resident tax rate. And the non-principal resident tax rate is 18 mils higher than what is currently being charged. So it's that difference that's reflected in the difference in the property tax revenue. If that is reflective of rezoning or not, I'm not sure, and I may have misspoke on that regard. But I know that once you have that additional use or that alternative use, then the tax rate that's applied goes up.
Yeah, and I'll just say the properties are not rezoned. If it's ag now, it stays ag. It will be typically it's reclassified, but that's much different than rezoning.
Okay, well, I just wanted to clear that up. So maybe it's the land that's in the PA 116 that would be it would change that classification. So, how much of this property is not in PA 116 currently? Do you know off the top of your head, Matt?
That is a great question, and I don't want to tell you the wrong answer. So I tell you what, we will make sure that make sure
you know how to get a hold of me.
We have those figures.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We will make sure that I tell you exactly how much land is in PA 116 versus non-PA 116. Right now, I think it's 50-50, but I'll make sure it's. I'll give you an accurate number.
I know. Yep. Oh, that's fine. You know how to get a hold of me. So, excellent. Okay, thanks.
All right, we'll move on now to a couple of online questions. And this one was submitted by Brianne Erkwitz. The question is, will control of vegetation be as environmentally friendly as the project itself, or does that include the use of pesticide and herbicide? Our water is already contaminated from farm runoff.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, one thing that we take very seriously is our environmental impact. And the vegetation that we'll be planting, such as the grasses and pollinator species, you do need to manage those in the first few years because you're planting all new grasses and pollinator species. So there is some weed killing that would happen in the first year. After that, it's not necessary. There might be some spot spraying, but it's very, very it's much smaller than anything that's happening right now with the facility, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong, with the Roundup and stuff that's used on these farms now, but that wouldn't be happening with these projects. We don't need to spray anything to keep the weeds down. We'd either use sheep or mowers to make sure that there's no vegetation that's blocking the solar panels. And other than that, that we want to let the land kind of live freely. So I hope that answered your question.
All right, our next question was submitted by Roger Johnson. And Roger states, understand a bit the issue of time of day electrical demand seems highest / match in the part time of day when solar / wind is most productive. Yet our provider is implementing a pricing structure with rates 50% higher during those hours.
Yeah, I've heard that, and that's a good question, Roger. I mean, the good thing about solar is that, it's producing power at the most power at peak demand, right? So around, 3 p.m. to 7 p.m., that's your most power that it's producing, and that's when the most power is necessary for the grid. What consumers doing with their pricing structure, I mean, that's obviously a different thing than we're talking about here, but I think they look at solar as fitting nicely for that. They do have a fleet of coal and nuclear plants that are more stressed during those times, and so that's perhaps why they're doing that. My guess is that the more the solar is implemented, the less that they would have to increase during peak demand.
So as a quick reminder, if you have joined us for this call via your phone and you have a question you would like to ask, now is the time to press *3 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. Or if you are participating online, you can submit your question by typing your name and question below the streaming player. And we'll go back to another online question. And this one was submitted by Brianne Erkwitz. And the question is, will pollution due to vegetative control through fossil fuel be offset by any form of carbon tax?
Okay, let me try to break this down. So let me read the question. So will pollution due to vegetation control through fossil fuel be offset with any form of carbon tax? I think that's more of a geopolitical question. It's certainly not applicable to the Carroll Road Solar Farm. Pollution due to vegetation control. That's something I'm not quite understanding right now. Maybe Brianne, if you could maybe jump back on and maybe clarify a little bit. The carbon tax, obviously, we don't have any, control over that. I don't think it has any legs right now in both the federal government and certainly not Michigan. And there is no pollution due to vegetation control through fossil fuels. So anyway, I hope that answered the question. If you can, maybe jump back on and clarify it a little bit more, and I could probably speak to it. Thanks so much.
All right, we've got another question coming from online. This one was submitted by Jennifer. And Jennifer asks, what do the jobs, labor income, and output numbers mean?
That's a good question.
That's definitely a Fletcher question. Go ahead, Fletcher.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. The job numbers are, when in the construction impact, we use job years, and there are two reasons for that. One of them is that on a construction site, the number of people who are actually on the site vary significantly over the period of construction, and the other is that construction may or may not last a year or more. So by using job years, we're able to provide a concise number that everybody more or less understands. In the annual operating impact, we use jobs, and that's exactly what you think it means. Those are the number of bodies who are likely on the site over the course of a year. Those are the number of people who are employed. Labor income is just the labor that's associated with, or the wages that are associated with those jobs. Output number is a little tricky, actually. In the way that it's used in our study, both for construction and for operating, what we're talking about are the dollars that are expended that stay in the locality. So, for example, the overall investment is $242.5 million. But if you get a copy of the study and you look at the direct construction impact, it's $21.9 million. So, again, using the in-plan model, which does a very good job at this, we're able to tease out specifically out of that overall investment those dollars that are likely to stay within the region, and that's the output estimate that we use. We do the same thing on the operating side, where we're just looking at the labor expenditures, direct labor expenditures, like Carroll, by the solar facility, and looking at their expenditures in terms of vegetative control, maintenance, and the like. So it's at $1.6 million overall, and using that, or the dollars from that stay local, as the output impact. So those are meaningful numbers in that they are what stays within the locality. And a lot of economic impact assessments, what they do is try to provide the largest number possible. So they would look, say, at an agricultural operation and look at the revenue that's generated as a result of operations on that property over the course of a year. And the vast majority of those dollars don't stay in the area. So it's a big number, but it's not a particularly meaningful one, because the dollars that are spent on new tractors, on farm implements, on seed, on fertilizer, really don't stay in the area. They go to where those equipment and the like are manufactured. So that's included in some studies because it's a big number, but it's not a particularly meaningful number. And the output estimates that we use in our report are those dollars that literally will stay within, or that we estimate will stay within the locality. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you very much. It looks like we've got Brianna on the line with us. Let's go ahead and bring her live. Brianna, welcome to the call. Go ahead with your comment or question, please.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I just, you guys answered my question. Thank you for that. I just wanted to extend my thanks for transparency of this project and for how all the residents have been kept up to date. I get all my flyers on my door and everything. And I just wanted to say that as far as future growth for our kids, and I just wanted to say thank you for all of that, and thanks for leaving the land better than it's.
Well, thank you, Brianne. I think I heard most of that, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
So moving on, we've got another question online submitted by Amy Daniels. And the question is, or the statement starts, I know the townships in the county are requiring certain setbacks. What happens in the setback area? Can that land be farmed? And also, can you tell me what other states and counties are requiring?
Certainly. So first, the question is, what happens to the setback area? Can that land be farmed? That really is dependent on that space, right? It has to make sense to the farmer. And if they can farm that land, we believe that's a great thing, and they should. It depends on the size of the setback area. The setback might not necessarily be the imposed setback from an ordinance. It might be a setback that we have created due to, shading or wetlands or maybe a drain of some sort. It all kind of depends on the actual area that we're talking about. And is it feasible to the farmer to actually farm that area? If it's a 100-foot stretch of land, that's typically just mowed. If it's, a bigger plot, then, we're all for them and facilitating, helping them farm that land. Also, your question is, can you tell me more what states and counties are requiring? Well, typically, at least in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, what we see what I almost always see is about a 100-foot setback from property lines. That's what the Lenawee County has suggested for this project. For the Deerfield Township, and that's what they suggest for townships around Lenawee County. I've seen setbacks as small as 25 foot from property lines. The most I've seen, other than Deerfield and Riga townships, are I think 175 foot was the most I ever saw. We build projects, around the country, and I haven't seen anything higher than 175 foot. We actually do self-imposed setbacks as well. 25-foot setback, I think, is it's not enough. You need a little bit of wiggle room here because we have a very expensive facility, and we want to make sure there's room to roam, and we don't want to waste any land by any means. The bigger the setback, what we consider is it's kind of a waste of land because it's either, if it's not being able to be farmed, then it's not going to be able to be used. And so we want to use the land as best we can. We want to be able to make sure that the land that we have in place is preserved and so we preserve the land inside the fenced-in area. And so anything that's outside of it, we don't really have control over it. So I hope that answers your question. Most states and counties are typically around 100-foot setbacks from property lines.
So our next online question is submitted by Jennifer, who asks, how do we know this is local spending?
I think that's a good one for Fletcher.
Again, we use a simulation model that's probably one of the most commonly used in the United States that provides us with estimates that are based on expenditure pattern for the specific industry that we're looking at, and it overlays that on the economic structure of the study area, which in this case would be Lenawee County, to identify what options there are for those dollars to land within that study area. And what that does is allow us to provide a fairly concrete estimate in terms of what will be not necessarily dollars that are spent within the locality, but dollars that continue to land or stay within the locality. Again, the example I use on the construction numbers, where total cost of the project is $242.5 million. But according to our estimates, approximately $21.9 million of that will land in the local economy. So we are very conservative in terms of the estimates of what will be local impact, because we know that those are important numbers.
All right, another online question. This one was submitted by Amy Daniels. Will this project cause an increase in property taxes for local residents?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, this project doesn't affect property taxes, how they're imposed on residents. We do have a significant tax liability from this project. However, the township officials and I guess the Commonwealth in general, they vote on how property taxes are implemented. So if they see an additional revenue stream, they could lower them. They could always raise your property taxes, or they could raise any millage. It's also voted on by the residents, so it's really not really up to us. And this project really doesn't have an effect or direct effect on your property tax bill.
All right, segueing back to a caller, we've got Bear Gilson joining us now. Welcome to the call, Bear. Go ahead with your question or comment, please.
Thank you. It was made very clear last night in the Planning Commission meeting that your economic impact statement was not accurate due to the fact that the new zoning in Deerfield Township will not allow this project. I'm curious on how you're going to handle this in the future and discuss it, since we previously had a letter put out by Dan Witt and also Kevin put it out in the communities that talked about the agricultural loss in the communities and what would be done. And that statement was also based on the same amount of land that your economic impact statement was generated on. So I'm just curious on how you're going to handle this in the media and follow up with this and where you're going to move forward from here.
Yeah, thanks, Bear. I'm going to answer part of that question, and I'll bring in Fletcher for the study done by MSU. So the first thing is the economic impact statement doesn't have validity due to the current zoning laws in place. No, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because the zoning laws change every quarter, right? I mean, they're constantly changing. That's why we have a planning commission that meets every month and a board that meets every month, right? I mean, so as you know, Deerfield Township has an interim zoning ordinance. They're working through a master plan. It's on them to accept or to take this project and think it and understand it is a benefit to the community, and they're going to implement a zoning law as they see fit, whoever that may be. So, we create economic impact reports based on the land, right? Not necessarily the zoning laws that are inside the land, because we know the zoning laws always change, especially in local governments like this. So the economic impact statement is still certainly impactful, because it would tell us what it would mean if the current, I guess what I would say is Lenawee County, if their setbacks, their suggested setbacks were implemented in Deerfield and Raga Townships. So, Fletcher, if you could come in and maybe speak a little bit about the report done by Michigan State University and how it's relevant to this project, and how the economic impact report also speaks to that, that'd be great.
Sure. The Miller report, and I'll call it that just to make the tally a little shorter, looked at the value of agricultural production that would be lost if the Carroll Road Solar Project were constructed. And we were asked by ESA to take a look at that analysis. And if you go through that analysis, one of the things that struck us was that the operational impact in both cases, both from agricultural production and from the solar facility or solar use, in terms of jobs and salaries, are very close. The Miller report shows 8 jobs annually for the property total employment impact. Our report for the solar facility shows 8 jobs. The Miller report shows $184,030 in labor income annually. Our report shows $376,703 in labor income, because solar techs are paid more than agricultural workers. The big difference is in the output numbers, and I addressed this a little bit earlier, in that those are a little misleading. The output number that's in the Miller report has to do with the total revenue from agricultural production. The output numbers that we use in our report have to do with those dollars, both during construction and operation, that would remain within the locality. The comparable number to the Miller report, which again was the value of the agricultural production, would be the value of the electricity that is sold from this facility. And you'd have to add a couple zeros to the number that they came up with in the Miller report to match that number. Both of those numbers are meaningless, or largely meaningless, because the vast majority of those dollars in both cases do not stay in the locality, which is why in our report we just used the output figure that would be those dollars that would remain within the locality. The big difference between the two reports, Miller report did not do fiscal impact for the property. It did not show that figure. But when we looked at that, what we show again is that over a 35-year period, fiscal impact from the property in its current use is approximately $2.8 million. Fiscal impact from the property in solar use is $35.1 million. So the operational impacts in terms of employment and wages are comparable. There's not a lot of difference, really. The big difference is in the tax revenue, $2.8 million versus $35.1 over 35 years.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add just a little bit to that. Yeah, you know, we've had the Miller report shared throughout the community. I think a lot of people received it in their mailboxes, and you know, it's extremely misleading because it says that, you know, what is the impact to Lenawee ag community? Well, the Lenawee ag community, that's what they're saying is that's money in farmers' pockets, right? That's money in providers' pockets. It's GDP. And if you compared them, obviously these farmers that are farming this land, you know, they're going to see an economic benefit to this project, right? And so any type of negative impact is far outweighed by the project, or this wouldn't happen. So, Bear, I hope that answered your question. Did you have anything else?
I did. I had one other question. I keep hearing the term exclusionary keep coming up, and I wanted to know exactly what you guys discuss or define exclusionary as. I heard a suggestion last night in the Planning Commission to go out to 750 feet for setbacks, you know, and 10% land usage and things like that. And I just wanted to know where you guys looked at as far as exclusionary in zoning to make things not be able to happen.
Yeah. So current interim zoning ordinance in Deerfield is exclusionary to solar, utility scale solar. There was a letter that was sent out that said that this question, is it exclusionary to utility scale solar? And then it said, no, there's 1,000 acres. That's not true at all, because what you have to do to create utility scale solar is, number one, utility scale solar is 20 megawatts or larger. And so 20 megawatts or larger, we're looking in the township, and there's no opportunity to do that with the 500-foot setbacks that are currently in place, the 10% ground coverage, plus the no solar in PA 116. So no matter what land we use, with any connections that we were able to get, there's no way to build 20 megawatts or even, I think, 5 megawatts in Deerfield Township. So that's why we you know, you hear that word. We do believe it is exclusionary, but I think that was done on purpose to make sure that they have their ducks in a row until they have a full zoning ordinance, a permanent zoning ordinance, right? You know, it's understandable to kind of take a step back and try to block a project, so make sure that you understand what the impacts are. So as they work through a permanent zoning ordinance, I think they'll see that, you know, in order to for solar to come into this community, they would have to reduce they would have to create more lenient or more commonplace zoning laws, which we see around the community, right? So anywhere around Deerfield, so Raisonville, in Monroe County, Blissfield, Palmyra as well, and even the current RAGA ordinance, they're all very common solar. Sorry about that. Sorry, I got virtual town halls, so dogs and babies are run around. Sorry about that. Anyway, if you had setbacks common to Lenawee County, right, all the townships that are around it, you would have it wouldn't be exclusionary if Deerfield and Ragged Townships had the same, right? So whatever Lenawee County has suggested to them, that's a very similar setback that we see every day. This is no PA 116 issues, because we believe that if the land is in PA 116, that's a benefit to farmland preservation. If we had those, put into a place that we see normally around the state of Michigan, then you wouldn't have that issue or that term come up.
Anything further?
No, thank you for covering pretty much everything that I had right now.
All right. Thank you very much for the call and the question. And moving on to another caller, we've got Vivian Pell joining us now. Vivian, thanks for your patience. Welcome to the call. Go ahead with your question, please.
Thank you for taking my call. I have two questions. They both are regarding hail and lightning strikes. First question is, do the solar panels attract lightning at all?
No. So, lightning, it's any structure is susceptible to lightning. There's nothing about our project that would, change that. The cells within the module are sandwiched within a sealant, and for this project, they're likely to be sandwiched between two layers of glass, right? And so for your hail question, I'll just probably maybe jump the gun here, but panels are rated to withstand at least a 1-inch hailstorm. I had a colleague that once took a golf ball and in a club, and he kept hitting golf balls into a solar field to see if he could damage any solar rays. It did not happen. They're also, these projects are built to withstand a 50 miles an hour wind, right? They need that, right? These are power generation facilities. You have to over-engineer them to make sure that any type of weather storm that comes in would it can survive that, right? We are under a contract to produce a certain amount of power each day, and we can't have any type of malfunctions within the facility, or we would be we'd be voiding that contract.
Okay, then my second question is, if the panels were struck by lightning or hail and they were broken, do the photovoltaic cells leak off any dangerous chemicals that could leach into the soil and the groundwater?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the answer, the short answer is no. Like I was saying, that the cells themselves are sandwiched together through sealants, and they have the tempered glass on that's sandwiched on top of those. And so you're not going to have any type of leaching into the ground. There's no type of hazardous materials from this project. It would be a very, very, very unlikely event for any type of groundwater contamination due to this project. If a tornado came through, I would not expect anything like that to be worried about, right? So what the big issue with a tornado is health and safety. I don't think that these solar panels will be on our mind. And when it comes to the environmental aspects, there's very little opportunity for any type of contamination with materials within the panel.
All right, thank you.
All right, Matt, moving back to online questions. We had one submitted by Jennifer. And Jennifer asked, what if the tax rates change, and how do we know these numbers are good?
That's interesting. So, first thing I'll say is, what if tax rates change? I guess we could say that for any industry or any, person, right? We don't know what taxes are going to change in the future. It is what it is now, right? But the big thing that you have to understand is, we're making this investment into this project with today's dollars in mind, right? When we give proposals for this project to utilities to purchase the power, we're expecting and modeling this project with today's dollar figures and today's tax rates. If taxes go up, obviously that impacts the project. If taxes go down, that impacts the project. We just don't know what's going to happen in the future, right? So we have to model this. We both model it internally with today's tax rates, and the economic impact report is in 2020 dollars, right? And so I guess I'll ask, it says, how are these numbers are good? Fletcher, what would you say to that? How would you respond to that question?
Well, again, they're modeled on existing tax rates, which is the information that we have available. We don't know what they'll be in the future. That's absolutely correct. What we do know, though, is that an economist always look at things relative to what, compared to what. And in this case, it's the tax revenue that you get from this use relative to other uses. And if the tax rates change, they change relative to those other uses too. So it really, everything kind of rises and falls equally or close to equally. So yes, we don't know the future, but we do know that it will apply to everything, not just this project. And what you're interested in really is what this project generates for you relative to others.
All right, we have a couple of questions submitted online by Pamela, and let's take a look at this one as, how can you say jobs will be available for the community? These jobs require specific skill sets. Isn't it a false statement? And when will you give data for Michigan and not another state?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So how can you say jobs will be available for the community? Well, most of these jobs are through trade, right? You're talking about electricians, you're talking about foremen, you're talking about drillers. Those are, local non 4-year degree required jobs, right? And if you look in Lenawee County, that's where the largest sector of jobs comes from. So in any of these solar projects that you build anywhere, it's typically 75% is hired locally, 25% is hired regionally, right? So, and that's all the construction jobs that we would have. Typically regionally is going to be your basically your project managers, the people that go around the country and they go from job to job to job to manage that job until it's done. And then you're going to have the remaining 75%. They're going to come from the community, and they're almost certainly going to be Michigan-based because, well, I'll just tell you what it is these utilities want Michigan-based labor, and they give incentives to power companies to make sure that you have Michigan-based labor, right? We think that's a good thing, and so you're going to see in all solar projects around Michigan, it's Michigan-based folks that are going to be installing these infrastructures. So what was the next thing? When will you give data? When will you give data from Michigan and not another state? Well, what we're talking about is Michigan. This is projects in Michigan, and whenever you're generating power, you don't want to buy power from another state. It's almost always better to, well, it is always better to produce the power in your home state. And so we can certainly give you the data for other states if you'd like, but if you're going to develop solar in Michigan, you need to be using the Michigan data. So it is true that a state like Arizona does receive more sun, so they do produce power at a cheaper rate, but that's not really relevant to this discussion, right? What we need to see is why Lenawee County is so great for solar is because of where it's located within the state and the solar resource there. So that's the main thing of why we show Michigan, because you produce power in Michigan. Solar is coming in Michigan, and this is a great place for it. So, yeah, that's about it, I think.
Okay. And Pamela also submitted another few questions. Do you support surrounding a home on all 4 sides? And how far are you pounding posts into the property?
Yeah, so actually we do not support surrounding homes on 4 sides. We try to give as much setback as we can to homes like that. We generally don't see siding of panels around all 4 sides of homes. And if there was anything like that, we would try to make sure that those neighbors are comfortable with the project, and any type of vegetation buffer or additional setback they asked for, we can accommodate, right? So, if we do have a home that's surrounded on all 4 sides, we're going to go to that neighbor before we build any project, and we're going to make sure that we get their insight, right? Where would they like to see the setbacks? Of course, we can't do that with an ordinance because we're talking about a specific home rather than an entire project. But we do understand that you don't want it on all 4 sides, and you don't really see that in this project. So I think there's there's 3 homes that would be on what it would look like on all 4 sides, because we have the property leased on all 4 sides. However, if you look at our site map, the panels and the infrastructure are not located on all 4 sides. I don't think we have a site plan that we've shared publicly lately, but we'll certainly share that soon, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. How far are we pounding posts into the ground? Yeah, so it's actually right. Pounding posts is actually the accurate term. What we do is just push them right down. It's about 10 to 12 foot. So it's just steel that goes right into the ground, and that's what is the foundation for these panels and these racking systems. And so right when we decommission the project, it's just taken right out of the ground, and you have it returns right back to farmland. So I think that's it.
All right, our next question.
I think we have another.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. There was one question from Pamela. I just want to get it asked. It says, you are giving data for Ohio, Iowa, and Missouri. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. We can certainly give you the data for Ohio, Missouri, and Iowa, but I'm not sure what that means. So, Pamela, if you want to reach out to us directly, we can certainly sit down with you, providing you that data that you're requesting. I'm just not quite sure of the ask here. So go ahead, Dirk. Sorry about that.
Okay, so another online question. This one was submitted by Paul, and Paul asks, what is the average solar setbacks to adjacent properties around the state and country?
Yeah, so it really depends on the locality, but generally it's around 100-foot setback from property lines. Usually you don't want to have 100-foot setbacks from roads because that's truly wasted land. You don't want to have it on a setback from an adjacent field. You know, if you have 2 farmland adjoining one another, you know, you don't want to have a setback of 100 foot on that land that's adjacent to that because, well, again, that's just kind of a waste of land. So you do want to have setbacks around homes. Generally what we see is around 100 foot. Sometimes, well, actually, it's pretty commonplace now where we see setbacks where it's the same setback as any structure, right? So maybe 25 foot or 50 foot. That's very normal because that's what this is. It's a structure. And so we're just abiding by the same setbacks that any structure would receive.
All right. Looks like we have one last question. This one was submitted by, well, another one just popped up. So this one was submitted by Marilyn. And Marilyn asks, how will you decide what seed mix is best for your pollinator habitat plantings? Do entomologists work with you to determine your seed mixes?
I love that question. You're absolutely right. They do work with us. We have to hire consultants to provide a pollinator seed mix to submit to the Department of Agriculture. And so we have a number of different pollinator species and grasses that we would have within that seed mix, and we have to work with them to make sure that, you know, you're creating a landscape and a ground cover that is appropriate for what we're trying to do. So, for example, if you have sheep in the ground, you're going to have to change that seed mix because they eat certain species, or they might have certain species that would affect them negatively. So it's a great question. What we try to do always is listen to the community on the plant seed mix. One thing I heard is milkweed is not good. I guess it's not good for adjacent residences, and so that's interesting. I know they help the monarch butterfly a lot, but we would have to listen to them if that's what the township wanted to impose, is no milkweed. So anyway, yeah, it's a mix between working with consultants that understand, seed mixes a lot better than we do, and as well as working with the Department of Agriculture and also the townships involved.
All right, we have a question submitted by Rich Van Hove, and states, the electrical union that has jurisdiction for Lenawee County is in Toledo. How can this benefit Lenawee County?
So the electrical union that has jurisdiction in Lenawee County is in Toledo. How can this benefit Lenawee County? So I think what you mean is, if we were going to use an electrical union, how would we hire them locally? Well, project might be in Lenawee County, but they don't have jurisdiction over any electrical work that's done in Lenawee County. What we'd have to do is you'd hire what's called a ETC. It's your contractor, and they hire your subs, which is your electrical workers. So they, again, have to be Michigan-based labor because of utilities requirements for that. So they certainly would benefit Lenawee County. I don't know we'd be using, I can't be for sure if we'd be using the electrical union out of Toledo. That would be news to me. But, what we're looking at here is Michigan-based labor that would come to Lenawee County and use their trades and skills to build this project.
All right, and just looking at the clock, it looks like we have time for one more question. And this one was submitted online by Brian Lidster. And a big question he hears from people in the community is, what would happen if something was to happen to ESA Solar as a company? What would happen to the solar farm? Would it be taken care of? And if so, who would be responsible for that?
Yeah, so if anything happened to ESA Solar, that's different than what would happen to Carroll Road Solar, because Carroll Road Solar is a project and that's the asset, right? So let's start there. If ESA Solar were to go belly up, God forbid, that asset would be sold to your highest bidder, right? And any power plant, you're going to have multiple bidders coming in. There's no power plant in the country that's like this one where that you wouldn't have folks jumping to that opportunity, because we would have that power purchase agreement in place. So if nothing changed about the asset and it only changed about the company, then you would have somebody come in and you wouldn't even notice that you had a new owner. So there's that. Also, if anything happened to the asset, say, a tornado did come through, or say, solar all of a sudden in 15 years was obsolete and we created this new, nuclear fission or something like that, you already have a decommissioning bond in place, right? We would have that with the township that covers any of the decommissioning costs. And that's placed with the township prior to construction. It's a requirement from the Department of Agriculture, as well as most ordinances. And so we put that within our model, and we understand that's a concern for folks. And so you have an asset that is protected through a bond, right? And so if anything ever happens, the township has control over that bond. We don't have control over that bond. So it's already ready there, just in case, again, God forbid, ESA Solar or the asset ever went belly up.
Thank you for answering that. And is there anything further you'd like to add as we wind down this call, Matt?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, we have this Brighter Future Scholarship that we've been doing. It's for the 2021. We already did the 2021 Brighter Future Scholarship that went out to an individual going to Western Michigan, Dean Swanson. So congratulations to him. Anybody that's interested in this scholarship, please apply. You can go to carrollroadsolar.com or reach out to us, and we'll give you an application for that 2021 scholarship. And again, if you have any questions about this project, please reach out to us. You can reach out to me directly anytime. I'm around the community every week. If you don't know who I am, I'm surprised because I probably knocked on your door. But if you want, you can reach us out at info@carrollroadsolar.com. You can go to carrollroadsolar.com is our website. You can see the economic impact report and a lot of information about the project there. And you can also go to our Facebook page at Carroll Road Solar. And so reach out to us anytime. We'll come sit down. We'll show you all this information in person. We'll talk through any issues that you have. There's a lot more questions I'm sure that folks are that they might have. And so we want to reach out to the community. We want to talk with folks. If you have, some pushback on the project, we want to talk to you and we want to hear from you. So please reach out to us directly. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. It's really been a pleasure of ours to host this virtual town hall, and we look forward to the future of Carroll Road Solar.
So as mentioned, we are coming to the end of our live event this evening. Thank you for taking the time to join us for this important Access Live event with ESA Solar regarding Carroll Road Solar Project. We appreciate the opportunity to speak directly with you and answer your questions. Now, as it was just mentioned, and we mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, to submit additional questions, please visit the project website at carrollroadsolar.com, or go to Facebook at Carroll Road Solar, or if you want to send an email to the development team, address it info@carrollroadsolar.com. Thank you again for joining us. Stay safe and have a pleasant evening.